Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our turn with the Master's Club and Math Moulthrop. I'm Kathy Beaux, the Chairman of the Arts Community Center, and we are here today to present in this afternoon's program, Philip and Matt, due to the generosity of our sponsors, whose continued support is invaluable to us. We thank the Georgia Council for the Arts, Kathy Mullins, Christine Lambert, Kay Cowan, Cindy Fetch, and Preston Snyder, and Annie Press. Thank you to Jan Stoner for facilitating our turn with the Moulthrops, and a very special thank you to Philip and Matt for sharing this afternoon with us. The Morgan County, the Madison-Morgan Cultural Center is excited about the upcoming year and celebrating our 50th anniversary. If you are not a member, you all know this, those of you that have been here before, please join us in the celebration and all that the center has to offer throughout the year. Please keep an eye out on our website, our Instagram, and Facebook pages to schedule up-and-coming visual and performing arts and humanities programs, as well as current events. We can't wait to see you here. It's important to mention today, I kind of fell into this somehow, that the Ed Moulthrop Beaux that's in our permanent collection and on display in the exhibit upstairs was gifted to the center in 1978, 47 years ago, by the Georgia Council for the Arts. I can't say for sure, but I would imagine it was one of the first pieces of art in our permanent collection. To have a turn with Philip and Matt today is full circle for the center as we celebrate our 50th year. The state of Georgia is fortunate to be home to the legendary Moulthrop Legacy that spans but is not limited to Georgia, the Southeast, and across the U.S. The works of master woodturners Ed, Philip, and Matt are in museums, permanent collections, art and cultural center collections, private collections, and galleries throughout the United States and beyond. The Cultural Center is proud and honored to host Georgia's native sons, Philip and Matt Moulthrop, today. Their work and family legacy has inspired generations of professional and amateur woodturners, some who may be in our audience. It can be said that they have single-handedly, but I think it's more aptly put, six-handedly, revolutionized the art form of woodturning with innovative tools, finishes, and design. We are excited to present our turn with the Masters and hope you will stay for the reception and book signing following the program in the Arts and Crafts gallery through these steps. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and come again soon. Please join me in welcoming Philip and Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt. That's my name. And that was my grandfather. Anyway, that was my grandfather. And I don't know when that piece was done. What do you guys?
That's probably 1970, 72. When he's doing the same chalices, but that's a long time when a big piece of wood. I mean, huge.
So it's in this art and hammer collection in California. We'll walk you through our family's history and how we create stuff, and we actually take questions through it. I don't know if we can answer them, but we'll talk. So that was my grandfather, probably late 70s. He was an architect by education, and he ended up in Atlanta because during the Great Depression he got a job at Georgia Tech. He was a professor maybe 5 years, and he went to work for and then on being an artist, that was a passion. I always wanted to be an artist. And we always painted and sculpted.
That's a good description. Now, he was getting watercolors. That was one of his main passions. And then he was reading an article in Popular Science. This was probably mid-50s, and it had an article about how you could cut sections of wood from a log and dry it without it splitting. And that's always been a problem for woodworkers. And so he tried this method. It's using like a polymer that you mix in with water, is water soluble, and it soaks in the wood just a little bit, but it's enough that when the wood dries, it won't shrink. And so when he found that, he just basically started doing this wood turning almost all the time.
So a log, you look at a log, it's a circle, right? Well, the pith is called the center, and that's the least stable portion. For woods in the eastern United States, well, they crack. That's why when you have logs, they cut down and you split them after they start to dry out for firewood. He found a way to procure the wood without it cracking. And to give you an idea, lumber's been on the quarters in the geometry of 1, 2, 3, 4 quadrants. That's your quarter saw lumber. And you're cutting away from the center. That was my grandfather had here.
That's Princeton graduate school. So when he was teaching at Tech, he taught physics and
Calculus.
so.
They didn't have an architecture program.
These are some of his buildings that he designed. I think the one his favorite was the Callaway Gardens Chapel. He always thought it came out really well. The old airport in Atlanta. This is the house that he lived in. This is the one I grew up in. And from the whole thing. That window, that's my bedroom window. And if you look right down below here, that's his lathe. He hand-made this lathe. It's not the conventional lathe with where you hold like chair legs. You couldn't do that kind of thing on this lathe. It's all held on one side. So he had this out underneath here. He'd come home from work and turn wood until it got dark. And so that was his workshop for quite a while until he added on about 2 more additions to the house. This is in his current workshop.
It's probably 70s. You get some guys' pants.
Fashion wasn't something that mattered as much as what he did.
So, as you can see, so what he's doing there is he's actually final turning. That's not rough form, but the bolts in the top shelf, those are all rough form. So we'll turn a piece from a log into a rough form of what's supposed to be like let it cure, dry, whatever the type of species is. We have a lot of rough forms sitting around, not all refinished. And then once they're final shaped, we remount them to the lathe and clean them up, make them thin. And most of the work is actually in the finishing of it, so it looks like glass. At this stage, back all the ones that would be on the shelf, so the ones that are in the picture, they're all turned, they're hollow, but they're probably 3/4 to 1 inch thick. There's 2 thick. But when it dries, it moves a little bit, so you want to allow enough space that when you put it back on the lathe and turn it, you'll have enough wood left, so you'll end up with a perfectly round circle.
I have a question about this photo. How is the bowl being held onto?
With the faceplate. So the steel threaded plate is bolted onto the log, rough form, take it off, and then we final finish it, we put a different faceplate on it, and that's bolted onto the log. And it stays on there until the final polish is done. And you'll see another slide, but that's the last thing we do actually. It's all supported on one side because that would allow
allows you to go work from the front and hollow it out.
So the lathe we used was an open face lathe, which I think they finally started getting on the market after 50 years.
This was, I'm sure I got this in here, but this is me back in the early 70s. I was in Saigon for a year and teaching English to Vietnamese Navy students, which was actually a very good tour compared to what a lot of the guys I met were doing. And there I am in a chemistry lab in college. I thought I was going to be a chemist because I like working. I just holding things in my hand and working with them that way. So.
And then you went to law school.
That's kind of bounced around.
So that was me when I was 4 or 5 maybe. There's a picture, my grandfather had a picture on the cover of the Life magazine, if anyone remembers that. And he put an apple next to the bowl. He didn't give it the right scale. He said, next time you stuck me in the bowl, he gave much better proportions of how large his bowl was starting with. This is our raw material. This is what we start with. And we're looking for colors, patterns. We don't always use the entire log. Sometimes we isolate areas. Because what you're trying to do is reveal the material. And you only have one shot because you can't go back. So the first thing you learn is how to read the material.
This is the log yard behind my house. They had a bigger place to put it. A lot of times the logs come in and the ends are dry a little bit, and so you can't see the color. So you cut off about 2 inches of the log, and any color that's in there will show up really well. So that's why we go back there occasionally and cut ends off logs to see what's out there, how good the pattern is, and if it's good enough, we'll use it for a bowl. If it's not, it gets hauled off to a dump. So.
And that's the mess we work in.
Most people say that and say, that's a junkyard. You don't want that behind your house, but that's kind of like a smorgasbord of woodturners. So.
And it's organized. I don't know. So this is the lathe that we use. It's an open face lathe. Here's not a second. I stopped the bowl. It was originally designed by my grandfather. We modified it. Not a whole lot, but it's still pretty basic, even with our approach. And then the long tools cut the inside, and the short tools cut the outside. So everyone should be able to make a bowl like this.
These hooks that you saw in the previous, they're about as big around your thumb. They're not giant hooks because they would just grab too much wood at one time. So, but just that small hook can clean it out very fast.
But essentially, we only use 2 tools for each piece. So one for the outside and one for the inside. And he's holding up a traditional woodturners gouge. That's called. It's very short.
Next one. These are the basic tools that we use, and there's that hook tool that you saw. And that's about as big as your index finger. This is a traditional bowl gouge right here. It's what most turners use. So I use this sometimes, but this is the main cutting tool. Then we found, after a lot of experimenting on this last one, that's a carbide tip. This is very sharp, but it's brittle. As long as you don't get like a nail, it never gets dull. And even though it's small, that's probably maybe bigger around than my index finger on the end. So it's not very big, but it cuts really. Even the hardest wood, it just cuts right through it. So that's why we made tools like that. So for most turners, that's not the big array of tools like a lot of them have. So.
Now, I got a woodworking store. I don't know what old stuff. So, anyway, but my grandfather used to make his own tools, originally blacksmithing them. But now we can get tool points and we modify them. And with carbide, it's a higher grade steel than what we were using before. So we kind of switched over to using carbide a lot with the pieces. And that's, see that thread at the top, that's where the bowl attach.
Right there. That's threaded. It's all the faceplates. All our faceplates are all made so they will all fit on this lathe. Even if it's for a giant faceplate or a smaller one, we have the faceplate where the adapters will always go on those threads. This is the tool rest, and I'm standing well on the other side of that tool rest when we're cutting. And the big tools, like you see back here, don't rest here. Even the shorter ones I use for cutting the outside, it still uses that same tool rest. And we got here, what else is this?
Go to the next slide.
Go to the next one.
So here we're just he's prepping a piece. He's going to put a circle on the gas, so I have a piece. That particular what's called box elder or Ashley maple, Eastern Indian, the scientific name. It's considered a trash tree, but it's got this scarlet red in it, and it's probably the most popular wood we work in. So that's how we catch. Any questions?
Do you generally use softwoods versus like hardwood oak or
Anything.
anything?
We did a project with the Panamanian government. They sent us a shipping container full of logs and we padlocked it out. It was awful. It was like concrete. Great pieces though. But this particular wood is good soft.
If it's too soft, you might think, well, it'd be easier to turn, but instead of cutting all the time, it wants you just to tear and rip out, and it's not good. So,
Yeah, so on that spectrum of wood density, the hardest woods don't actually cut, they just chip like steel. The softest woods don't cut either, they tear like paper. So, for instance, we make pieces out of cereal, and it's way too soft, like you pick it apart with your fingernail. So we actually have to vacuum pressure our finish into the wood, solidify it enough for us to actually cut. So step one is called rounding the log, where we get it uniformly flat, and then you can start to the arcs of the shape.
you always do the outside first, so you'll know what your limits are when you're cutting the inside.
And we're very quiet when we
It's very noisy. You wear ear protection and face protection.
So on a piece like this, the objective was to make the bread look like a waterfall. So that's how you start to bore the hole down the center of the wall, far enough so it doesn't hit the screws or the bolts you saw in there. And then from that point, you just start pulling out the piece.
This is that hook tool that was seen earlier.
So it rolls in a stand because it's way too a major hole, but we need the weight of that tool because it will literally lift you off the ground. And when you're doing larger pieces, we have to add weight to the stand it rolls on.
Where do you get a tool rest like that?
You go to a machine shop, the drawings and they make it up for you. Everything we've made was all custom made because nobody sells most of that.
Yeah. Because we turn on what's called an index where we have this pin, and it's a fulcrum, whereas traditional turners don't have a pin. They just slide the tool across the tool wrist.
Some of those we use it, but now we're buying a lot of the basic tools and just shape them to fit our needs. So.
Yeah, we'll buy the points, and we have the tool handles, and I can reshape them for interior exterior cutting. So, that's a rough one. That's what, from log, a piece of log.
And once you haul it like this, and it's about 3/4 of an inch thick or something. Now the storage room is just wrapped, and so these poles can sit in there for years. They don't like rot like a piece of wood might. It's dry. It just stays there forever. And so I can go back 3 years later and say, oh, this one, I can do this one now. And just take off the shelf, and the pattern is still just like it was the day it was turned.
Are you using the treatment? Treatment with this?
So that's the treatment. Polyethylene glycol 1000. It's a water-soluble wax. It's in a lot of different products, household products, but it's a clear wax, but the tendency of wood to leach it. And they used to put everything through PEG for treatment. Meaning treatment means the wood doesn't crack. But over 50 years, we have a lot of shared knowledge, so not everything goes into PEG. Actually, very few does now, because we understand a lot of the properties of these species of wood. And these are the rough ones.
Yeah, it's a storage room that you just saw.
For instance, my grandfather had pieces that were unfinished going back to the 60s. And I have stuff that's maybe 25 years old there.
What was the liquid in the tanks?
Pardon?
What was the liquid in the tank?
It's polyethylene glycol 1000.
What is that?
It's a water-soluble wax that displaces moisture in wood through gravity. It's non-toxic, it's inert.
So if you look, it's the one we did, we buy a drum, there's like a lot. And you open it up, it just looks like white paraffin wax. But you get up to 100 degrees, 110 degrees, it starts to melt on its own. So
And then once you add water,
it's very soluble.
it doesn't re-solidify, but what it does is pushes its way into the wood, pushing the water out.
If you're ever buying really medicines and things like that, look on a label and see if it has polyethylene glycol. It'll probably just say PEG 50 or PEG 100. That's the molecular weight of that particular PEG they're using. We use 1,000 weight, but they use it for what? They use it for all sorts of preservation of foods and stuff like that, and cooking. So.
Lotions, a lot of products. And some people get freaked out because ethylene glycol is like
It's not ethylene glycol, which is poison. This stuff is. If you ever had a colonoscopy, you probably met this same chemical because they use it. That's all the only thing they use.
You use anything on top of that, or that fence coat?
You mean when we do the finish on it?
Is there a fence coat on top of that?
Oh yes, but this is a second turning, so and I'll use turning and sculpting synonymously. And at this point, I've taken a rough form like you saw. It's been treated or just gone straight to drying, and it's drying. And so at this point, we'll do the final shaping, where we are cleaning up the curves, making it super smooth inside and out, and we turn them thin enough where aesthetically they feel delicate, but structurally it's still solid. And it's a tapered thickness wall, so it's not uniformly thin because it would make the bowl tippy as a sculpture, so we like to have more than mass on the underside. That's a final.
Just that easy. That one, it looks like the inside. We've already turned that one thin to about as thin as it gets, and it goes in the sand after this.
But is there a kind of wood that can be made thinner than other kinds? I mean, is it sort of, how tolerant can you be about the thinness of the bowls? Go real thin or somewhat thin, or is the wood?
The proportion of wall thickness would depend on the overall size of the piece,
Okay.
not necessarily about how the density of the wood.
Well, some of the really soft woods, it's hard to get really thin because they don't have the strength. But if you're turning an oak or something, you can get really thin.
But yeah, so what we're doing when we're working is turning's rhythmic, so it's constantly spinning, and we're listening to what's going on, and we're stressing a material that wasn't meant for this. Most of the woods we work with are considered trash trees. There's a reason why certain woods got domesticated. Your oak, cherries, maple, and pine, because they behave a certain way. You know, it's so different than the horse and the zebra. One got domesticated. Well, a lot of these materials, it's echo chamber actually, similar to a violin or cello. So we can hear the stress of the material, and what we're listening for is flaws, meaning a crack, something that can shatter. And so it does use a lot of senses as far as not only sight but sound. And this is getting down the final shape of the inside of the bowl. That's when we're listening the most. And it's just through experience you'll learn the depth of it, so you don't cut through the side. So I was like, hell, I always cut through the side. My grandfather was so patient. I learned so many good pieces, but it was part of the process. Yes. Finish on the inside.
That's the inside. That's probably as thin as that'll go. The rest has to be done with sanding. You can see there's my exhaust that pulls the dust out of the air.
In a perfect world, are you going for as thin as you can get?
Yeah. Wall thickness has to do with the size of the piece. So if it's a large piece, the upper lip and opening is going to be a lot thicker. Because it will break if you think about it out. So small pieces is more critical because that same portion has to be shrunk down. And large pieces will turn twice, meaning bring your fresh wall to the rough form and then final shape it after it's dry. We turn the miniature or smaller pieces in one single turn because we can dry a block of wood that's small. To give you an idea, the rough roll, 2x4 takes 2 years to dry. That's thinnest dimension. So that's a rough roll. So you can't dry a giant block. It'll only dry up to a certain point and it will contain moisture inside it still. For instance, people send us these hard pine beams for buildings and they'll say, oh, you know, my granddaddy in 250 years. I said, well, I know, but I'm going to cut through it and it's going to release moisture. It's going to work and change. So that's why we want to do the second term of that model.
If we're thinning it down, here's the sticker along the back up to about here, and then it starts getting thinner. And then right here it thins down to what you're seeing there. So but you wouldn't necessarily want that thin all the way around because then it's more liable to crack.
And then there's one behind the back right corner that you cut through.
Is that what you talking about down there?
Yeah.
There's one that didn't make it. Sometimes if it's just, on the wood, you get it not terribly thin, but the wood didn't seem to like it, and it just explodes. But where we're standing, we're in front of it, so when it explodes, it goes out to the sides. It doesn't come back towards us. Thank goodness.
So this is the our finish, and there's 6 to 10 coats of finish on each piece, but it's not layered. It's got an optical clarity range, so we're staying within that where it preserves the piece, but you have really good clarity of the wood underneath, because if it's too thick, it's distorted. And some pieces take more finish than others. It has to do with how.
What is that thing you put on there?
We don't really know exactly what it is, but it's in the epoxy formula.
This machine, this is a design I came up with because we would coat these bowls on the lathe, and when it's being coated, it's not going super fast. It's going just enough that we can hold our brush and it evens it out. But what we used to do then take a pair of really big pliers, take the thing off and set it on the countertop. The trouble is because it wasn't setting up yet, it slowly sagged, and that's when you had rings before it sagged, and then you had to go in there and sand it all off without damaging the bowl. It was tedious and not fun. It was terrible. And so one day I was watching on the Discovery Channel about astronauts, and they showed that when they make their spaces, they don't go down to Kmart and buy a spacesuit. You know, it's perfectly matched to that one person. They measure every part of them, and everything's done. And the gloves are perfectly made. What they do is they take an imprint of the guy's hand, and then it goes in the machine, and as it rotates, they have this sprayer that would spray the coating on there. And so I said, that's what we need. We need something that will rotate our thing while we're doing it. So I came up with this, and it turns, maybe 15 RPMs or something. It's just about like this. Not enough to throw the material off, but it won't run, and it actually evens out. We have a perfectly even surface.
Our finish isn't actually dry, it's chemical reaction, it's not evaporative, and when it's rotating on the machine, gravity uniformly levels it. And this is polishing, so when we polish, we actually use water, and then we make our own polishing compounds for the finishes we use, because we buy all of it as a raw material, the finish, the polish, and then we'll blend for what we need. So for instance, with our finish, I can change how hard or soft it is, I can change how viscous it is, and similar to polish too. So miniatures have a little different style to it. So and that's a polished cherry roll burl. That's the basic cherry roll.
One of the last steps is to use that sander with a polishing disc on there, so it's just high speed. You get just like glass.
And burl, so there's two premiums in the liquid. Burl, which is like a cancer, and the premium of that one is very pretty, and it's very stable, meaning it doesn't crack. And so most burl is harvested for veneer, where they cut with like paper, no panel yachts and jets. The other highest grade is musical grade, that has to do with the impaction of the grain. So violin or cello, Honduran rosewood is probably most coveted now. Very different appearance.
Question. When you're cleaning out the interior of the bowl, how do you miss the screws that you screwed the faceplate on?
We measure the depth so we don't cut to that point. And when I do, I break the
So if you've got an inch and a quarter screw, how do you keep the bottom from being more than an inch and a quarter thick?
Depends on the size of the piece. Sometimes we'll put the faceplate on a waste block and glue the waste block to the wall. And then we don't hit the screws. But we shorten the screws on the final finish. So longer ones when we're doing the log. The final finish, when we're doing the final shaping, the screws are much smaller because all the mass of the wood's gone. I don't use giant long screws.
How do you measure the bottom?
With a
Ruler. Bowl, the outside bottom.
With the thickness of the bone bottom, you mean?
Yeah.
We got big calipers that we can reach in a lot of it and measure from top to inside to the outside. But if you
screwed on you've either got a block or the faceplate screwed onto the bowl. You take it off. The bowl is beautiful. The bottom is ugly. What are you going to do with the bottom?
Next slide.
Next slide. what you're talking about, it's ugly at that point.
There you go.
That part has never changed since we mounted a block of wood on there, so. But it gets sanded, and you sand it really smooth, and then put the coating of the finish on the bottom, and then we'll fill the holes with sawdust from that we saved from the sanding. And then after that hardens, it's a little bit rough, and we'll sand that smooth, and then it gets really smooth. Put 2 more coats, and then you get this thick coating on the bottom of it. It's totally smooth. So.
It'll engravable after that. And so part of the artistry of wood turning, I always call this a revelation process, because we're taking away, not adding. I'm just trying to reveal what nature's provided. And so you only have one shot or approach when you're starting with it. So we're always trying to manipulate the axis of the log. So this piece is actually frameable. It's turned vertically, meaning the tree can resist like this. But we can also take a tree and then orient 180 degrees and turn sideways. But any of the geometric spectrums are always manipulating the axis for a different appearance.
Yeah, this is one of our favorite woods because it's not extremely hard, but it's hard enough that it doesn't tear. And if we find the right logs, you get this bright red color. Farmers don't like this kind of tree because it drops a little thin wheel things, and they end up thousands of these little trees popping up everywhere. But they're good for this. So.
The bacteria in the wood. This is holly, American holly. It's white when it's fresh cut, but as it oxidizes, it'll turn green. And we do that with cherry mahogany. When they're fresh cut, they're salmon colored. And he actually came up with a solution to spray on it, and it instantly ages it. Black walnut reverse oxidizes, so it's very dark when it's fresh cut, or newly finished, but over time it lightens up. It's like a coffee cream color.
Are those actual rings we were seeing there in the last one? What is all that nice weight? Are those rings?
Yes.
Those rings. It's just
Because some of them don't seem to have any rings showing.
Depends on the species, how defined the ring.
Also, when you cut that rock, these circles are perfectly aligned inside so that they all just line up evenly like a record. Someone found it way through or something that'll one will be kind of bulged out and stuff like that. And that's how you get the surface looking like that.
That's mimosa, considered a trash tree. It's has an identical grain of black walnut, except has more of a green hue to it. We like it. It's actually not a soft wood. You'd think it would be because it's fast growing, but the richness of a mimosa grain to us is more powerful than the black walnut. With black walnut, it's very consistent and it's pretty, but there's a reason why it got used, because you can match up black walnut boards from Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida, and they're gonna be pretty much on. Whereas mimosa is not as distinct or defined in that growth. That's Spanish oak. That's turned on 180, so the center of the tree, right?
There's the center right there. So this is the log was laying down when it was turned. So.
That's your cedar. Eastern red cedar. The white's the sapling. It provides a nice contrast. Cedars be more pretty, range from pinks and purples.
Fairly soft.
And now that the area of Greater Atlanta has grown a lot, we're getting some of these trees that were imported are living out their lives. So I've probably done more cryptomera, which is Japanese cedar, than actually our local cedar.
This is a section of white pine. One reason you can tell is because they're not the way they grow. You ever see a white pine tree? Look at it closely, you'll notice there's a trunk with no branches, and then also all the branches are within a circle right together, and then there's a trunk and then branches. So we cut the section out that has the branch nodes on it, and you get to see the knots. And like this one, found that you cut it like the tree grows, but then you turn it upside down to turn it, all the knots and stuff, they look like they're running off the side on the top, so you can get different appearances just by turning the log one way or the other.
And white pine's actually hard to turn because the top portion where you're seeing all those branches intersect, or called nodes technically, is very hard. The green's bottom side is very soft, so it's not the simplest piece to turn. And the most common pine in Georgia is loblolly pine, and we use that. Doesn't have the same ring patterns, so this one tends to be more of a favorite.
That's not from a special tree. This is actually one that I made. These are all cross sections of cedar, and what I did was trying to come up with a new idea. Not that I reject just regular turning, I just thought we wanted to try something different, and I came up with this, where I take a bowl that could be one that I started working with, and it cracked, and I couldn't use it, but I could glue it together long enough to make a form to glue all these cross sections. So I went here, these red cedar sections, and they're probably 2 inches to 3 inches in diameter, so this real big, and they were about, I cut them about 3/4 of an inch thick, and I glue them all over the surface of that bowl, and then I fill in all the space in between with using our finish. And it's darkened with carbon black, which is like super black. There's nothing wrong with using darker than that. And you mix it in with the finish, and you get the black backgrounds. And the reason is I use that is that that's about the only thing I could put that wouldn't interfere with the color of the wood. If I tried to make a brown background, it would kind of take away from the rest of the pieces or any other color. So this is just a background that just stays in the background, and you get to see the wood.
And he does a whole series of these, but that particular one, he had it in the White House in his
This is the same idea, except rather than making round pieces, put long sections. So I'll start out with a pail out of round pail, and I cut all the pieces the same, and I put them in there in a way that I envision they're going to show up in the final cutting when you got curves involved. So these pieces, these pieces are on the outside, and they're in, and the ones at the top that you don't see much of, but they were pushed down the middle of this cylinder, and I poured the black material in. It fills in all the space in between, and you let it dry overnight, and it's ready to turn the next day, and then you just start shaping it.
The woods he's got in this one is red cedar, mahogany, and oak. Mahogany is a yellow one, it looks like a holly. It's a shrub. So this is a sculptural form. I started doing these 10 years ago because I was being criticized that I was just making another boring bowl. So basically I started piercing through forms and self-taught. It became quite a challenge in the beginning because even though a bowl is a three-dimensional object, the focal point's only the outside. So now I was having to deal with not only perfect finish and uniform or perfect thickness balance outside, inside, and inside. So I had to come up with a little bit different finish and method to these. That's dogwood. So I do furniture, but only by commission. This is the only thing I don't do. That's poison ivy vines. So I gather from harvest. I have someone that helps me with allergy, and the harvest vines for me, and I'll make a form, and the vines are laid out in the form, and then we pour the black resin, fabricating, basically they will give us sawmill cut, and then the guy who helps me with my allergic, he can what do you call it? So plane it down, and then I finish it a little different. I use a marine epoxy, so it's fully encased. But it was scratching, so after marine epoxy, I now have someone that comes and does clear coat automotive finish on it because it's not highly, it's not susceptible to scratching. So, and our finish is typically thicker, whereas the automotive finish is like water. But it's made to withstand a rock bouncing the road in your car and not scratching. So it's an interesting finish. Same family as those white mix bags you can't tear apart.
This is Matt turning on a piece right here.
Final turning. So, questions? Speechless?
Yes, yes.
We do, when you're turning larger bowls, you return the bowl to the peg between thinning the walls and things, or?
So, it depends on the species of wood. Some woods don't need peg. Some woods reject it. So, it's more about where on the log I've used it. And the only time you use peg is if it's a certain type of species and you have that pith being the center of the log in the piece. So they will go into peg anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months, depending on the wood density and how large it is. And then the drying time, roughly the same. So,
Was peg used in the pine pieces that are on display here?
it might
I think so. If my father turned it, I'm sure it probably was, because that's what he was using almost exclusively. And then after I got into it, and after a while, I started thinking, well, some of these we don't need to use it quite as much. So just kind of try to tweak the system every now and then and see if there's a better way to do what you're doing. So if I came up with something new, the machine you saw that multiple turning really slow, that was one that I showed my father. He had immediately built one like that for himself. He was always having to sand off the little clips that came down the balls, which was so terribly tedious.
So this would be rough forming from a log. Yes, sure.
You wear a face mask when you're doing that.
Really?
And we idiot-proof it when we're filming.
I have a question for you. There's a lot of commonality between the multi-generations of Beaux. Are there people that influenced what you folks did other than each of you influencing each other?
Well, I'll answer my answer, like you answer, because I don't know what things he could. If I could look at Woodturning magazines, I'm always flipping through there to see what the other people are doing. I think they're turning a different kind of shape or a different kind of wood, and I find it interesting. I wonder if it can be adapted to the way I work. And I don't feel like, that's any. It's not like I'm taking away something from the other person. A lot of times the methods that other people use more work for how we do it. But I still watch because I'm going to pick up these little things that save a lot of time or energy when we're doing this.
It's an interesting question because with the technique, approach, a lot of words that people do for fun, a lot is not applicable to what we do. It's just because we make our own way. And sometimes the spindle turning, stuff like that we don't do. So as far as influence, they were my influence. Within our work though, you can tell pieces, if you look at them, who did it, just by the nature of how our curves roll on the piece. So I can tell the difference between my grandfather and my dad. So.
If we go to any exhibit like the one here or anywhere else, without looking at any name tag, I can point at every one of us mine, and every one of us my father's, and every one of us his. Because they have a different shape, a little bit different shape. And it's always present in almost every single one of them. So.
Are there people that copy you and when you see them you go, wait, come on.
Sure, there are people who do that, but a lot of all this, the machines you're seeing here and that tool, all everything, the tool here, we had handmade for us. We did it. We got a machine shop to help us get it done. So the average person will say, I think I'll be a woodturner. Well, they're not going to go out and do that. They're going to go to one of these stores that sells wood turning tools. And you get in there, there's just 100 different kinds of cutting tools, you know, and for different reasons. So the ones we use, which is just maybe 3 or 4 different ones, but that does everything we want it to do. If you want to copy this, I don't know what to do.
Imitation is the greatest form of flattery.
That's right.
So at this stage, you've seen the hollowing portion of the rough forming, and we can be quite aggressive with our cuts because the wood's still full of water and it's malleable. It's when we do the final shaping, the wood's dry, it's much more brittle.
You see that bar right down there? That's a foot switch because we figured out long ago that sometimes you're cutting in it and you hit a knot that's inside and it grabs a tool and won't quit. And the machine is still running, it's just the belt. You can't reach, let go of the tool, so you can't reach around the side. So we put one switch in the front that you can lift your foot, turn it off if you run into an emergency situation.
That tool I'm using in this has that stand which has tremendous weight on it, and sometimes I've been picked up in the air by it because the lathe's not going to stop. And so having the foot switch is the easiest way to be, and I don't know, I haven't heard too much.
This one that I've dealt with has the electric motor. It's 3 horse, which is for electric, but it has gear. So it's like running your car in a low gear, it just can pull a lot of stress. And if you get stuck on the wood, the belt slipped. You can't have power. So then you turn it off and you get your tool out of it.
Yeah, the questions?
It's been great. It's wonderful.
How do you find it? Sunday road, middle order,
There's a couple of tree companies in and around Atlanta that supply us. Or if we request something or they come across it, they'll call or text now. And some of the wood yards, like the Pauline Cherokee wood yard, the guy that owns that, well, he's always got something we could use if we need it for a commission. But now so much of our work is commission based from families. They'll send us their tree, and we make pieces for their children and grandchildren. And they're picking the wood that they ship it to us. It comes from all over the country. And we do some commissions for companies. I have an ongoing commission with LSU, National Geographic.
Lots of different people I ask for different reasons.
Well, let's start with
On our source of wood, we have met several people who do tree cutting. I mean, not these giant firms. These are just guys. There's 4 or 5 guys in a crew. You get to know them a little bit and just tell them if you're ever cutting down such and such tree, wild cherry tree, and it's at least 14 inches of diameter, call us up because we'll pay you for it. And of course, they're interested because they make money cutting the tree down for the person, and they get money from us for bringing it to us. So we don't go out with chainsaws. We're very, very rare when we do that. So.
You said you received a vote from the Commonwealth now. Was that useful? Were you able to make things fun?
Yes, we did a whole series. He was the Panamanian ambassador to the United States. He had a friend in Atlanta that brought him over to my studio, and I met him, and we were doing a project at the time for the Columbus Museum where they had taken out the dams in the Chattahoochee River. And when they did that, they discovered the original dams were just submerged. And so we did a series of all longleaf pine for the Columbus Museum. And he's like, nah, listen, we got the canal. I'm gonna send you something. And I was like, oh, this is like old piece of wood. No, he sent like a shipping container full of logs. So,
Like within 45 days, a shipping container arrived, and I was like, he knows somebody in the agriculture department. You did not ship material like that without the reporting system.
So, yeah, and it was a neat project. The woods were much more difficult to work with because of the density. So the theory is Pangea. So when the Ice Age occurred, it wiped out the vegetation on the northern continents. And when our forest in the northern continents regenerated, we have a much scientifically much less mature species of the tree, but they're in the same genus and phylum as the trees on the southern hemisphere. And that's where these came from. And the woods are, even though they're much harder, they don't crack. They're very stable. They're very consistent when you cut them. Trying to think of the wood that's consistent. Bullet wood, which is purple. Tiger. It was
very hard.
So once we finished the series, it exhibited the OAS in DC, which is the Organization of American States across from the White House, and then part of it went to the Carter Center to go on exhibit, and then the other part went back to a museum in Panama. So there's a new project. I'm still doing pieces for that. But National Geographic was a fun one because they planted rare trees around their headquarters in DC. Well, fast forward 50 years, they're doing expansion, and they had to cut all these trees. Well, there's only one tree that was considered rare because at the time they planted it was Japanese maple, some of those like cryptomera, which aren't rare. But they did plant a tree called the yellowwood tree. They had 4 of them. And I had to convince them that that was the tree to use. And so I said the wood is fluorescent yellow. And it's a southern tree. It's endangered in the wild. It's so rare, I've never actually seen one growing on its own. I've only ever seen one planted or arboretum botanic settings. But the Americans used to make yellow dye from it. They look like a maple. We've only gotten the wood 3 times. Grandfather got it once in the 90s. And then one of our tree companies cut one down at an apartment complex in Sand Springs, and the city arborist misdiagnosed it as maple. And then National Geographic. Yes.
So, who will continue the legacy for
The daughter is 18, starting college, and my son's be 13 next week. So, how long ago? Yeah, my son's turned. He had fun with it. So, he's turned with you.
I was 30 when I started turning, so just later on. I always like making things with my hands, so that probably was the introductions. You just gotta wait and see if the kids want to.
Yeah, I mean, I was a teenager. It was really I could drive, and so my mom was, wake me up in the morning in the summer, sitting at grandfather's, and I worked for him. For a decade, and he taught all the grandkids how to turn. There's an innate ability about it. So I could just capture shapes that he was dictating to me from logs, and so I did a lot of reforming. And then we started doing restorations, and so I learned the whole thing. I look fondly back on those times, a lot simpler. But that was kind of my introduction. But as a generational thing, it's in this field, it's almost like being a musician. So if your father is a famous musician, doesn't mean the son's going to be appreciated or people get to work.
Do you have a hallmark to identify your Beaux for posterity?
Well, we signed the bottom of each one of them.
There you go.
And we put our name on there. We put the kind of wood, we spell it out in the common name, and then we put the Latin name under that. Okay. And then we usually put some numbers on the bottom to represent when it was done. So you can look at one and say, oh, that was 2 years ago, this was 5 years ago.
And it's actually engraved into the finish. And then if the wood came from a special location, we'll go around the circle at the bottom. add that to the piece. So the historic tree comes down here, call us. We'll make a Madison series.
When you do commission work for people, do they want like children's names on them and things like that, or do you just do it?
I've done everything.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you the one thing.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine wanted to bowl to give his son after he graduated from college. It was a small bowl. The bottom was this big around. And he said, "Can you engrace on it?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir." So I'll take to our son, who we love very much. And something like that. He said, "No, I said, no. You got 4 words, and that's what's good."
That's cute.
And aesthetically, people, why is the bottom of the bowl smaller, larger? There's a proportion to how large the base of it is to the overall piece. So, for instance, on a large piece, it may have we got bottom to be 12 inches, 14 inches. On the miniature pieces, it could be an inch. And we have to set a waist block to it because our face plates don't get that small. And so we'll cut through the waist block and then we can narrow down the point to the smaller block or base.
I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees here at the Cultural Center, and this has been a real pleasure. I appreciate Jane Stoner making this happen. I appreciate all the donors of the works, and Burris, Kate Cowan, Chris Lambert, the Georgia Council of Arts, and if you haven't seen the exhibit, please go upstairs. And Preston and Cindy Snyder, they were the only ones that had a map. A lot of people had Philip, and then the state's collection is mostly their fathers. But anyway, it's a beautiful exhibit. If you haven't seen it, please take time to go upstairs. Also, please check your membership. Dina at the front is able to make you a member. If you're not a member, it's only $55 a year. Of course, we'd like for you to be a member at a higher level. And we have snacks, lemonade, and a book signing. So please join us in the members' room. And this is a gift from us to you. They're the same. And it's just a pleasure to have artists that are willing to come and share their mastery. And these guys are in collections all over the country. So we appreciate it.